So in this new system, how will schools actually be judged?
Okay. Elementary schools will have 3 indicators again. It will be achievement, gap, and growth. And let's just talk about the elementary situation first. For achievement, schools will receive points for what we call NAPD, Novice, Apprentice, Proficient, and Distinguished. Actually, there won't be any points generated for novice scores, but they will get points for Apprentice and Proficient and Distinguished. And then there's also bonus points available, which is a really good thing. And the way bonus points will be calculated for achievement is their novice population will be subtracted from their distinguished population. So it's causing schools to focus on both ends of the spectrum, that you want to reduce your students scoring novice and you want to increase the percentage of students that are scoring distinguished. So that's going to help you create some bonus points. So that's the achievement portion of it. And then the gap portion of it, it's different for gap than it's ever been in Kentucky before as well. In the past, our gap score was calculated what we call a duplicated gap group. And depending on if you had 1 designation or 2 designations or 3, that's how many times your test scores counted. And when I say designations, I'm talking about the typically underserved populations. I'm talking about free and reduced lunch status, minority status, special education, and English language learners. So there are the 4 areas. And in the past, if you had multiple designations in your score counted multiple times. Well, this new, what's called non-duplicated gap group, is going to create 1 group. So no matter how many designations you have, you still would just be in 1 gap group category. And your points will come from students scoring proficient and distinguished. There won't be any credit for apprentice scores in this category, but it will be for students scoring proficient and distinguished just within that gap group. Okay. Then the last one, the growth, and this one is a little different than anything we've ever talked about before, and we've always talked as educators about we should measure growth. We should be able to achieve points for students that we move forward that are on a path of continuous improvement. I mean, that's the intent of education, what we want to happen. So the way the growth factor is going to work, it's going to be measured in reading and mathematics only. And for the elementary schools, it's going to be for 3rd to 4th grade and 4th to 5th grade only. And I'll explain how that works in just a minute. For middle schools, it's going to be 6 to 7 and 7 to 8. And then for high schools, the growth score will be from the plan to the ACT, the plan test that students take as a sophomore to the ACT that they take as a junior. So let's go back to that elementary scenario. The way growth is going to be calculated this year, because we don't have 2 years of data from our new test, we're going to compare the test that we took last year, the 2011 test, which was the KCCT test.
Right.
And we're going to compare that to the K-Prep. And automatically people say, well, you can't do that, that's 2 different tests, that doesn't make sense. Well, here's the reason that you can compare that. First, they're both the same content. It's both reading and mathematics. Now, yes, that K-Prep test was more difficult, had more rigorous standards, but it's still the same subject. And everybody took the same test. So if you go back to your statistics a long time ago, reliability and validity, if you do the same thing to your test groups and you don't alter any other variables, then you can compare and get reasonable results that they can be valid. So we are comparing KCCT to K-Prep, and that's how we're going to get growth for this year. Now from here on, it'll be K-Prep to K-Prep. Right. But we'll take a student's score, let's just take reading for instance, we'll take a student's reading score in 3rd grade when they took the KCCT, and then we'll compare that to their 4th grade reading score on K-Prep. And another factor in this situation with growth is students will be put into what's called an academic peer group. And that means whatever score that I scored on that first test, on that KCCT test in 2011, everybody that scored like me, that same score or range of scores, will be my academic peer group. So let's say, for instance, you and I were both third graders taking the reading test, and we both scored a 75. That's just a scale score, just a number, okay? We would be in an academic peer group along with everybody else in the state of Kentucky in the third grade that scored 75. So that's our academic peer group. And then for the next test, the K-Prep test, how we scored would be put on a bell-shaped curve, starting only with those students that began with us in our academic peer group will be ranked. So we put them on a bell-shaped curve. And then if you scored 40% better than the rest of the students at the 40th percentile, then you will receive a growth point. So if you score at the 50th percentile, you're getting a growth point. If I score at the 39th percentile, I'm not receiving a growth point. So, and it is true growth. I mean, it's a good measure. It's a little difficult to understand to begin with, but it is a good measure because it means we started out at the same place.
Right.
We had a year's worth of instruction. Everybody had the same standards in Kentucky. We had a year's worth of instruction. Then we measured again on the second test on the K-Prep. And then if we scored better than 40% of the other students, we're getting a growth point. And you're only compared to your academic peers. It's not like that I would be compared to a student that started out at a score of 90. So it's only your academic peer group, and it's all students across the state of Kentucky, not just your school or district, but every third grade student. And again, we're only comparing reading and mathematics. Well, the same thing happens for middle school. And then high school is different in that it's still reading and mathematics, but it is on the plan test to the ACT. And it'll still be 40th percentile. And some folks have said, well, why 40th percentile? Where did that number come from? Well, typical growth on a norm reference test is 50th percentile. But we've done new standards. We have a new test. What we submitted in our waiver for No Child Left Behind for this new assessment accountability system said 40%. And that was acceptable when the federal government accepted our No Child Left Behind waiver. Then they were accepting that we were going to judge that growth on the 40th percentile.
Okay.
So that's the elementary picture.
Okay.
The middle school picture then is achievement, gap, and growth.
Using the same...
Using those same measures and using the same way to achieve those. And then they add the college readiness portion of it, and that is their Explore test. The Explore test and the Plan test and the ACT are all ACT products, and they're part of what we call the EPASS system. And they are components of that ACT to look at students' college readiness. So we start taking that test in the 8th grade, and then we take in the 10th grade, and then we take the ACT in the 11th. So we take an Explore, a Plan, and an ACT in that progression of preparing students to demonstrate their readiness for college. So that's the middle school's college readiness. Then when we go to high school, the achievement and the gap and the growth are calculated using their end of course assessments, like the K-Prep was calculated, but we're using a different assessment. We're using that end of course assessment. Then they have added the 4th measure, which is the college and career readiness, but theirs looks different than the middle schools. Theirs is based on multiple indicators. The ASVAB test, also that's in the academic portion of it. Then we have COSA, and we have industry certificates, career skill standards. All of those are parts of a measure to indicate whether students are career ready. And then the college ready is still ACT, Compass and Coyote are other examples of college readiness. The good thing about the measure in the high school for college and career readiness is students can indicate both. They can be college ready, or they could be career ready, or they can be both, and there's bonus points associated with that. So that's a good thing because we have lots of students that are college and career ready. You know, they have they've met the benchmarks on the ACT test, to indicate they're college ready, but they can also be enrolled in coursework and career clusters where they're actually getting industry certificates for careers.
Okay, so
that's the fourth.
Yeah,
and
then we still have graduation.
And we still have graduation.
Right.
And that graduation rate for high schools, it's been calculated in the past, and this year's calculation will be used in this manner. It's called the average freshman graduation rate, and it takes a freshman and sophomore group and averages the numbers, and then divide it by the senior class that are graduating, so the graduating seniors. If your population is not very transient and it's pretty static, then those numbers reflect you fairly accurately. But there's lots of schools across the state, high schools, that's not a very fair reflection of them, and there's some controversy about that, and we're going to a new model. Because if you had a significant number of students that left your high school for whatever reason, they could be graduating somewhere else, but they've changed high schools, they've moved, whatever, that negatively affected your graduation rate. Well, we're going to what's called a cohort model. That's going to be a better way of indicating that graduation rate. And that was already in the works under No Child Left Behind, that the entire nation eventually would go to this cohort model. So we've just been transitioning to that. And it's going to measure students who enter as 9th grade and graduate in 4 years. And right now our graduation rate expectation is at 90% up through the year of 2015. That's the goal. In 2022, that rate is going to 98%. And it's never completely going to 100%, you know, and folks may say, well, why isn't it? Everything else is 100%. Well, typically in the state of Kentucky, about 2% of our students, to account for that other 2%, are in programs that they can stay longer than a 4-year. They can stay until they're age 21. Some of our alternate assessment programs allow that. So we're accounting for about a 2% of students across the state that fit into that category. So that graduation rate is going to 98%, but not until the year 2022.
Okay.
So with that being said, the 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school, are similar in some ways, and they're very different in some ways. So, but it's a measure of trying to ensure that we're looking at students that are college and career ready starting at elementary school, because we know that that's the foundation. And if you look at the percentages of how that schools are held accountable, the elementary schools' percentages for achievement, gap, and growth are 30%, 30%, and 40%. Well, when you move up to middle school, that decreases to 28% for those 3, and then 16% for the college and career readiness. So we're decreasing the expectation that the test score itself is going to be the major factor. It's decreased by a slight number because we're adding the college and career readiness. Now it's only 16%, but even at the same time, that's still a measure of achievement because that's a test. And then the high school's measures are all 20%. They're all equal. So all 5 of those measures are worth 20% for each individual measure to get that overall score.
Okay. So that's how the scoring is done.
That's correct.
In this new system for the different schools and how they'll determine that. Now you also have 3 levels that we want to talk about of how the testing and programs are assessed, and actually also how the teachers and principals will be assessed as well.
That's correct, Gary. What we just talked about is what's going to be released with the 2012 results.
Right.
And it's 100% what we call next generation learners. But there's 3 components of this overall system when it's all fully implemented, and that won't be until 2014-15. But when it's in its full implementation stage, it will be next generation learners, next generation instructional programs and support, and those are what we call program reviews, and I'll speak about that in just a moment. And then the 3rd component is the next generation professionals, and that will be teacher and principal evaluations.
Okay.
And that's the good part about this system, is it's not solely driven by assessment of students. It is a large majority of student assessments, but it also includes what we're calling program reviews. And you may remember program reviews as coming about when we stopped testing in 7 content areas. In the past, we tested in the Big 4, language arts, science, social studies, and math. But we also tested in the 3 that we have program reviews for now, which are arts and humanities, practical living and career studies, and writing. So we were doing pencil and paper tests for 7 content areas, and that was a lot to be testing on. I mean, students had a difficult time creating answers for all of those within that testing window, and it was staggered into some grade levels, but it was a pretty rigorous expectation. Well, what came out of all of this is what we call program reviews. And I guess a good way to explain that is, if you were trying to assess my knowledge of, let's just take arts and humanities. If I were an artist, can you tell my skills and assess my skills on a pencil and paper test?
Not likely.
Probably not. The questions that I might get on the test, or the way that the test was arranged, it might not measure my knowledge and skill and ability.
Right.
So the notion of the program reviews is about assessing the entire school's program, their access and opportunity for students to achieve and to have opportunities to participate in those programs. So in my opinion, again, it's a better way of assessing those content areas. But it's going to be called this Next Generation Instructional Programs and Support. And next year, this time next year when we're talking about test scores, it will be 23% of the overall score. So this year, the next generation learners, the test scores themselves and student test takers, will be 100% of what we're receiving back. Right. Next year, it will be 77% and 23%. And then ultimately, in probably 2014-15, when we implement the 3rd portion of this, the 3rd piece of the pie, the next generation professionals, those numbers will decrease to add that component in. So our next generation learners would be 70%, our program reviews would be 30%, and our next generation professionals would be 10%. And what that means, it won't be conducted differently as far as just the assessment portion of it and the evaluation. There's more pieces to that than just the evaluation instrument itself. But that instrument, there's an instrument out there that's being piloted in 54 school districts across the state, and they're gaining information from that. They're trying that out with some teachers and principals, and they'll provide feedback. And of course, that instrument may and will change.
Right.
Then there will be a statewide pilot of the instrument once it's deemed to meet the needs. And then once that's piloted statewide, of course, there will be feedback to that as well. And then looking at that 2014-15 school year would be when it would be in full implementation for that to be in the assessment and accountability. So up until that year, none of the evaluations, principal or teachers, will be part of the overall score, but it will be when it's in full implementation.
So ultimately, this new testing system really incorporates lots of various different areas.
That's correct.
To grade. So it's not all 100%, as you were saying, testing, written testing. We have other ways of assessing. So it sounds like it's more well-rounded.
That's right. It's what's called a balanced assessment system, and that was the intent. That was part of Senate Bill 1, that we would implement balanced assessment, and even in the classroom that plays out balanced assessment of formative and summative assessments, and how we look at our schools and how our schools are being judged in multiple ways, rather than just students sitting down and taking a test in a certain week out of the year in the spring. So there'll be multiple measures, and I think that's a good thing. I think that gives students some opportunities to showcase what they're doing, particularly in those program review areas.
Yeah.
So it's about documentation, and because, you know, if you were an art student, I couldn't assess your art ability on a pencil and paper test,
Right.
but you could create some wonderful art, and we could have documentation of that, we could have pictures of that, videos of that, to include in our program review.
Again, I'm talking with Lynn Keene, who in the past has worked with the Marion County School System, so a lot of you may be familiar with her in that way, but now she's with the Kentucky Association of School Councils, and we've been talking about the new assessment and accountability program that the state of Kentucky has implemented. With the testing was last year. The first test results will be coming out very shortly.
That's right.
And there is an expectation that because of the way that they are graded in different ways, also the numbering system's different, that the numbers will be lower than they have in the past. So we'll make sure that the viewers realize that.
That's right.
And hopefully we've helped explain why that is.
That's right.
And that this is a better system for evaluating how our students are doing.
Yes, and I agree with that. I agree this is a better way of doing that. And at Kentucky Association of School Councils, that's our intent, to try to share this message, to try to get as many people that want to understand and want to know about the system. And we feel like the stakeholders in the community, they want to know this. And we hope that the viewers are listening and taking in. I know it's difficult. It's a lot of information.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just knowing that the system is different, and hopefully when they read the newspaper or they see the media coverage, that they will understand a bigger portion of what's changed with our system, and that the whole intent of this is that we are trying to raise the expectation of our students so that they are college and career ready and can compete in a global society.
And do keep in mind, when you see the numbers and they are possibly lower or are lower than they have been in the past, it's because of the way they're graded, and that we're still moving ahead.
That's right.
So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
It's been very interesting, a lot of information, as we were saying out there. Hopefully we'll have you on again. Maybe when the numbers come out, we can talk a little about.
Sure, I'd
what
be
they'll
glad
mean.
to, Gary.
Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Again, I'm Gary White for Central Kentucky Television. I've been here with Lynn Keene with the Kentucky Association of School Councils, talking about the new School Accountability and Assessment Program. And be sure to keep an eye out for those numbers that will be coming out hopefully in the near future.
That's correct.
Right. Thank you very much. It's Gary White for Central Kentucky Television.